Hello, my name is Anne Marie Bayer. And today I want to talk about coffee. I know a lot of us are avid coffee drinkers. We rely on it every morning, but how many of us know the history behind coffee and where it came from? I want to go in depth about that. The first time we saw coffee was in 900 AD. At the time, it was in an Arab country. There was a physician, an Arab physician, who noticed that there was an active ingredient in the coffee plant that caused animals to be very high energetic and have weird behaviors, become very jittery. And he thought that that was very strange behavior for those animals. And so that's how they discovered caffeine as an active ingredient in the bean. So in 600 AD, the growth of coffee became very popular in Arab countries. Coffee was under a certain botanical plant category, COFFS, coughs, and there were 20 different species of plants under this categorization. But out of all of those, humans tend to drink three species, and the most popular of those three species are two, known as Robusta and Arabica. Their scientific names are C. robusta, C. arabica, and there's also a less popular third option that we don't see a lot of people very interested in drinking. It's just not as popular. It's got low variety and isn't very flavorful. So that is called C. Liberia. So coffee started and spread from Arab countries. In around 1500, Turkey started to adopt the coffee crop. So from the Arab countries, it spread to Turkey. And then during the 16th or 17th century, um, Italy started to pick up growing coffee as a crop as well, and they got that from Turkey. So it started to spread as a movement all across the continent. But it arrived to America through this other country. One of their leaders of another country heard about the mass production of coffee beans and went on an expedition to learn more about the climate for growing coffee and to see if he could adapt it into his country as well. After a lot of deliberation, these other countries didn't want to share their crop and give them access to coffee beans, so it became a little bit of a war over it. And so he was finally able to get a hold of those crops and grow his own. And after seeing that, Brazil wanted to do the same. And so he went to France and met with the leader, and it was again another dispute over how can I get these coffee beans, and they didn't want to swap coffee beans. They had two different flavors of coffee and two different varieties of coffee. So they decided to convince and persuade, maybe even sleep with, the wife of the French leader to get a hold of these coffee beans. Sure enough, she packed these beans into a plant and hid the beans in the soil and gave them away. So they went back to South America and Brazil and began to spread coffee beans there as well. So out of all of the countries, South America has the most mass production growth process, right, when it comes to coffee, South America and Africa. But coffee has to grow in a warm climate all year round, and it needs to be very tropical. So northern countries like Europe aren't better suited for growing coffee. So that's why Africa and South America do really well in growing that crop. I would say the least amount of coffee growth in a country would be Jamaica. They have what's called the Blue Mountain Jamaica coffee, and it's really phenomenal. It's very delicious, and it's the most just phenomenal made coffee on this planet. Although Japanese do usually buy out the coffee in Jamaica, it is very expensive. It's $40 a pound compared to your average $16 or $17 a pound, even going down to as low as $4 a pound. For $40 a pound for coffee, that's very expensive and goes to show how elite this coffee in Jamaica is. So moving on, how do you make and process coffee? The most popular usage of coffee, like I said, is the Robusta, and that's in the European region. However, in the American region, we tend to more associate with the Arabica type of coffee. And just from the different tastes over different regions, there are reasons for why certain countries prefer certain types of coffee. The Robusta coffee is very insect repellent and very easy to grow, but the Arabica coffee is very hard to grow and it has to be hand-picked. While the Robusta coffee, when it becomes ripe, the ripe bean will stay on the leaf and it's very easy to have a machine clean it out. While with the Arabica coffee, when the ripe bean becomes ripe, it falls off the branch and becomes ruined by the soil. So you have to hand pick it right when it's ripe. That's what makes it a little bit more expensive, but also makes it taste a little bit better. And one more thing, with the Liberian third coffee flavor, that is also very insect repellent in nature and very easy to grow. So the Robusta and Liberian coffees are going to be the easy growers, although the Liberian coffee is not very popular anywhere in the world, really. So the process for making coffee looks like there are two different types of method for it. There's a dry method and a wet method. During the dry method, when there are certain countries that are water scarce, they'll hand pick all of their beans and lay them out flat to be dried by the sun. Once, maybe a day they've been dried out, all of those beans will be flipped over so that the entire bean has been fully dehydrated by the sun. And then they will be hand picked and hand peeled to get the coating off of the bean. Some manufacturers do have machines and some don't. It really just depends. However, in other countries where water scarcity isn't an issue, they will throw all of their coffee beans into a water bin and leave them to soak. And once they're absolutely saturated with water, there is a machine that will peel those beans for the coating off of them. So once the seed of the bean, which is what we call the coffee bean, has a shining coating on it that has to be removed. So in order to remove that, there is a machine cylinder that is used with lots of holes inside of it, and it's very hot. So the beans get rolled around in there, and the shiny coating gets roughed off. And then what's left after this cylinder machine is the roasted coffee bean. So the last and final step is the roasting step and the brewing steps. During the roasting process, there are several different durations on how to roast a coffee bean. There are short durations that are made for your everyday drip taste, very mellow. It's not a strong, dark roast flavor. However, there are certain processes to create a strong, dark roast espresso flavor and vice versa. Different companies will change how they do that depending on what kind of flavor and what kind of beans. Because, there are the Robusta and Arabica beans. There are lots of different processes for how you want to go about that. There are some red ripe beans and some green ripe beans, and those change the flavor of how the coffee is going to come out, whether it's going to be more mellow or more strong. So they are able to control the process between the green and the red to make it more red or more green based on how they want the bean flavor to come out. And this is how we end up with different types of names for our coffee, like the French roast and the dark roast and on and on and on. It's just all about how long you spend roasting. That creates the flavor variety throughout the process. So now I'll move on and explain the brewing process. And there are tons of different ways people go about this, but in general, I'll start from the beginning In the Arab countries and in Turkey, all in the Mediterranean area, they used a long metal tool with water underneath it, and they would clean and make these beans absolutely fine and add sugar to the water, mix it all up with this fine roast, and let it simmer until they saw it start to boil. Once it began to bubble, they'd pull it off and fill it up again and do the process repeatedly over and over and over again until they felt that it was time, and then they would pour it into small cups. And they had to be very careful to make sure that the coffee was very evenly distributed among the cups, because at that time coffee was a rarity, and in those countries, on all of those Middle Eastern countries, it was very important to them. So going into the European era, we saw what is called the percolator. They also had a metal tool that kind of looked like a teapot where they would pour the beans in the water, let it boil, and almost a similar process to create their coffee. And it'd be 6 to 7 minutes. And then they would have an electronic drip through a filter that created their coffee. In the European society, they relied heavily on machinery rather than doing things hand by hand. And in the European countries, espresso was very popular for them. But it wasn't something that was very common because the machinery to use that was very expensive. So it was somewhat of a rarity and a luxury for them at the time. And they had these machines that required lots of extensive cleaning and the knowledge to be able to use the tools. And then once everything was said and done, they pour it into this machine and they made themselves coffee. Now, there are all kinds of different types of coffee. And first of all, there are cafe au lait, and that is coffee that is 2/3 of hot steam mixed with the beans, and it kind of tastes a little bit like a mocha, almost like a chocolatey flavor, and that's called cafe au lait. The other one is Viennese. This is the Italian type of coffee. It's very red in color, and it's almost tastes like a black coffee. They add whipped cream, and that's it. It's not very popular in America, but it is in Italy. Maybe during the summer in America, but during the cold, maybe during the summer they would add ice and make it cold, but it's very black. They've got cafe espresso. That's very prominent, strong coffee with hot water, and it's very caffeinated. And then the final that is very popular is cappuccino. And that's kind of the same thing as an espresso with the shot of espresso, but it's not 2/3 of milk or hot steam, but it's got froth in it as well. And they use a special machine, of course, to establish this. They've got boiling hot water going through a very thin nozzle that dispenses this hot water into a cup. They mix it all up, and this creates a froth. And then they add that with hot milk and steam, and the froth goes through and through to create the cappuccino. And of course, they can add flavor like vanilla and nutmeg and whatnot to make it more sophisticated. And this can even be made at home. But I've asked lots of my friends, have you made espresso? Do you have an espresso machine? All of that. And some people say yes, but it doesn't work well. The machine's kind of iffy, or they've given up. And so later, I saw my cousin in Switzerland, and she uses her own homemade, what's called a grisella. and it was created in Italy, and it looks almost like another machine used in a different country. However, it's just got a nozzle and an extra handle and boils water very well. And once the water steams throughout this pot, it's ready. But this machine that my cousin has is very powerful, and it works very well, and it's cheaper than buying a fancy machine at home, one that doesn't work well. So my advice is to buy, something $40 or $50 and use that every morning. I can't start the day without my cappuccino.